Hello and welcome to the Introduction to AIM webinar. I'm so glad you could join me today. I'm Wendy Maxwell. I'm the teacher who developed this methodology. I developed it in my classroom with my students over the course of a number of years. And I'll talk a little bit about my background as we move forward. I am based in British Columbia right now, but for many, many years, for most of my teaching career, I was in Toronto, Ontario. So I'd love to know a little bit about you guys. Today, I'm going to talk about the AIM, the Accelerative Integrated Methodology, and how it rapidly develops proficiency. But before I begin, I would like to just ask you to write in the chat, if you don't mind, if you can find that chat box. Just let me know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what city or region or state or province you're from, or country. You may be from another country, of course. Also what, if anything, you know about AIM and what grades and languages you teach, particularly the grades and languages, and excuse me, where you're from would be very helpful because that will help guide me in the types of videos I will show you today and specifically what I will address when discussing AIM. So if you could write that in the chat box, that would be very, very helpful. Just have a look at that now. Yeah, so just make sure you're writing to everyone so we can all see that information. So as you're writing in the chat box, I'm just going to start to tell you a little bit about how AIM began. AIM stands for the Accelerative Integrated Methodology. It's accelerative because it rapidly gives students a handle on the language. They understand words very, very quickly. And they begin to speak very quickly. It's integrated because as a former French immersion teacher, I realized the benefit of teaching a language through another subject area. And as a result, I realized that I could also do that in a more limited core French scenario. So I developed a methodology that centered around the use of literacy through theater, drama, and also choreography, music, and dance. Well, choreography and dance are the same thing. But so as a result, we have a methodology that can be used in a core or limited scenario, FSL, 30 minutes, 40 minutes a day or so, and is also used in French immersion. It is a methodology because this system or methodology and works, all the parts of this methodology work synergistically together to become a very powerful system that rapidly develops proficiency. So although as I developed AIM, I discovered that various components of the methodology worked very well independently, as a whole system, it becomes many, many times more powerful than just singly using those various components. So I'm going to show you a little video here that demonstrates what parts of what AIM is and how it is implemented around the world in different languages. Just a very quick video.
Everyone will do the song
Ta grand-mère, parce que c'est la grand-mère de Chaperon Rouge et la mère part à Chaperon Rouge. Alors c'est ta grand-mère.
To the monde fantastique.
La classe toma. Yo tomo. Una persona importante o importante. Importante. Entonces yo no hablo con tú. Okay.
Contigo.
Oh, sí.
我要教一个故事。小鸡住在农场里，一天小鸡去上学，一个小果夹在小鸡的桌上。怎么了？哎呀，天塌了，天塌了！怎么了？你去哪里？天塌了，天塌了！
So in the videos, you probably noticed that the students are pretty engaged in the learning in the classroom. The students are talking a lot. They're reading the teacher's gestures and acquiring the language, connecting with each other spontaneously in the language, as you saw in one of those clips, in French, both French and Spanish. So I just thought I would acknowledge who's here. Welcome, Paul. I see that you are from New Brunswick, and also Amy, a French immersion learning specialist. So glad to have you here today. I want to make sure that this webinar is for you, particularly because you are the two here and you're both from New Brunswick. So if you have any particular questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask as we go through the webinar. I definitely want your questions answered, or as many as possible by the end of this webinar. So as I developed AIM through the initial stages as a core French teacher in Ontario, teaching kindergarten to grade 5, I'll back up a little bit. I started as an immersion teacher, as I mentioned, with the Toronto Board. At the time it was called Toronto Board. I taught from kindergarten to grade 1. And of course, those are the startup years as students are just beginning to learn the language. And I found that I could maintain the target language. The kids were understanding fairly well. They were beginning to speak even in grade 1. And yet, of course, those children had French every day, all day. Now I moved subsequently to teach core French in another school in Toronto. And that school was kind of a perfect learning environment or teaching environment, as the parents were supportive. The students were, average students. I didn't have too many students with learning challenges at that time. And so it was sort of a perfect environment, one would think, for students to acquire a language. And when I entered the school, I thought, well, of course, these students, after 7 years, because my oldest students had French every single day for 30 minutes a day for 7 years, I thought, oh, these kids are going to be great in French. No problem. I'm going to just take them on from there. However, I soon found out that the students could not understand me when I spoke in French, could not read very well or at all, much really in French, could not speak in French at all, and could not write a sentence, much less a story. So I was incredibly frustrated trying to do as I was doing in immersion, speaking only in French. The students were not tolerant of it. I couldn't get them to speak in French. And I just said, oh my, this is an absolute waste of time, what's been happening over these past years. Subsequently, when I went to do my master's research at OISE, Ontario Institute for Studies and Education, I spoke to a researcher there, and when I was doing my research, my master's thesis with a comparison of AIM and other programs that are used in core French, for example, she said, I wanted a study that showed the proficiency levels of core French students. And she said, don't quote me on this, but there is no proficiency in core French. And I was very surprised, because at that time, my students were developing very good proficiency. And really, unfortunately, I guess that said it all in her mind, that despite the efforts and the work that teachers put in to try to teach French, there isn't a lot of proficiency happening. Of course, there probably is in some places, but they just haven't done studies on it. So that all being said, my main goal as a core French teacher was to ensure that my students rapidly gain proficiency, because I felt the sooner they could gain proficiency, the more confident they will be, the more engaged they will be, the more they will love and feel that the language is part of them and will feel success and therefore want to continue. So that was my goal from the very beginning. And I'm just thrilled that the new guidelines that have come out, and upon which many guidelines are based on the CEFR, have had a great impact on the guidelines across Canada. Talk about those can-do statements. And that is really what AIM has always been about, developing authentic language proficiency. So AIM is both a comprehensible input-based approach where every single technique and strategy that we use in AIM is there to ensure language acquisition, that students understand, that they're able to be guided in their speaking until they become independent, which hopefully isn't much longer than a few days into the program. So as you will see in this webinar, many strategies that are based upon the notion of comprehensible input being a very important aspect to the development of language proficiency. But as I mentioned earlier, it's also a content and language integrated learning focus, which as a former French immersion teacher, I found, and I continue to find, a huge benefit. And I'll explain this in detail a little bit later when we get into the content, the major components of the methodology. So what AIM does best is to provide a unique quick start approach to the development of language proficiency. So we want to get kids up and running in the language, developing what we would hope would be an immersion-like proficiency, really within a fraction of the time that we would normally see development of language proficiency. And in some cases, as we find, language even after many years doesn't develop. So it is not tied to any specific curriculum. It was based on the pure intent to develop language proficiency. However, I've done a lot of linkages between curricula across Canada and the United States and others to see how AIM meets or exceeds, and it indeed does meet and often exceeds the expectations of all the curricula with which I have aligned this methodology. It's multidisciplinary, as I've mentioned. There's a lot of brain-based research that supports what we do in this methodology. And certainly it supports learners and students who have different learning styles as well. And so I'm happy to share that research with you if you're interested. We have links on our website and other research as well. So where is AIM used? It's used in Canada primarily, also to a great extent in the Netherlands, also in Australia and the United States, and to a lesser degree all over the world. So it started in one independent school in Toronto, and now most schools that use AIM are public schools. As I mentioned, Australia and the Netherlands, and there's a recent research, a fairly large longitudinal study that was done that came out not too long ago that demonstrated that students in AIM classes outperform students in other programs in all language skills. And in that area, parents, because AIM was being used more and more broadly across the country, they were demanding that some type of study be done. And so those are the results of that study. And they continue to do studies on AIM over there. And we have students winning national competitions in the United States. Those are French competitions that they have entered. And to the key components of this methodology. Well, first of all, in the video that you saw just a few moments ago, you probably noticed a component that's fairly unique where we use gestures. And this is one very big component of the comprehensible input aspect. When we communicate with the students in the language, we use gestures to support their comprehension. So for example, if I was learning Mandarin and I said, and you don't know Mandarin, or if I was trying to teach you Mandarin and I said, ni hao, or shuo, or ting, those are arbitrary sounds, just like any word in French or Spanish or English. They all start as arbitrary sounds to the language learner. So if I say ni hao and you don't know what that means, it is difficult. Well, how do I show what that means? Well, as soon as I do ni hao, well, now you've put a link to the sound, the arbitrary sound, and its meaning. Of course, all language teachers do this naturally, but the gesture approach takes that notion to a whole other level, because now we are linking every word that we use to a gesture. And so we have gestures like marche and écoute and regarde, and ouvre and ferme and veut and peut and doit and aime and écrit. We have other words like avec and pour and quand and si. And we have words like porte and maison and livre and crayon, for example. So nouns, adverbs, adjectives, conjunctions, question words, all the very high frequency important words that we want to introduce to the students are gestured. So what this allows us to do is to pass directly to meaning very, very rapidly for the students. No longer do they have to really guess what the meaning is, because most of the gestures are very iconic or natural, so they get it right away. In addition to the fact that the students are now comprehending very rapidly, what we're also doing through the gesture approach is encouraging students to speak as we gesture. So they're getting an incredibly high level of practice orally with the language, which is great, not only because they're getting this practice and because the shy students are not singled out and they don't want to be singled out, but they're speaking as much as the strong students who want to be speaking all the time, and the weak students who need a lot of repetition and are modeled with their peers around them also saying the words and supported. So students of all different levels are getting equal access and equal practice with the language. So this is great for the development of accent, for the development of confidence, for the development of syntax, for the development of understanding of the words, and just practice so that the transition from practice with the teacher gesturing to their own speaking is very natural and very rapid. So the gesture approach allows the teacher to develop spontaneous practice with the language, because as the teacher gestures, although we have sort of scripts and suggestions as to how to introduce words and review words in the teacher's guides that we have, the teacher will naturally be gesturing anything spontaneous that he or she would like to say to the students. Someone knocks on the door, the pencil falls on the floor, inviting students to come up and do something, whatever it might be, that is gestured, and the whole class says it together. So they get a lot of practice with the language production. Now, what are the words that we introduce to the students? Well, this computer is sitting on a dictionary, and the dictionary is this thick. There are a lot of words in a dictionary, as we know. And so how do we decide which ones? And this is something I found when I was using a thematic approach, where I would not necessarily choose words that the kids would be using a lot. I'd teach them lists of fruits and vegetables, or lists of clothing that we don't even talk about very often, or lists of, I don't know, animals or insects, whatever theme we were working on. But the kids were not using these words in class. And I realized that we need to give, in a limited time, whether it's 30 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day, 1 hour a day, we have even immersion is a limited amount of time. And so we want to make sure we're focusing on the high frequency functional vocabulary, so the students get access to that language early on and with repetition. If we offer too much language, what happens? Really, less is more. If we offer too much language, the students get lost in the quantity and don't develop enough proficiency, don't develop that foundation for language proficiency that they must have in order to build on it. So we concentrate on a certain number of high frequency words, and these words are very the pared down language, as we call it, is very, very verb centered. So we offer a lot of verb, which is very unlike the thematic approaches that tend to be noun centered. Another aspect to AIM is that we don't segment the teaching of vocabulary into themes where we teach certain words and we move on to the next segment and we don't revisit those words that we taught before. Then we turn to the next theme while not really repeating the words that were in the 2 previous themes. AIM is holarchical. So we're building a certain core vocabulary, the most high frequency words. As we add more vocabulary, we go back and repeat. So from one step kit to the next, we're always going back and repeating the most high frequency vocabulary as we build out. And this is another reason why the students develop rapid proficiency. So the pared down language is verb-centered. And how do we teach the verbs so that the students rapidly acquire the verbs easily? Some are very hard to conjugate, and we don't want to limit verbs because some of the hard to conjugate verbs are amongst the highest frequency words that we use in the language. So verbs like veut and doit and peut and sais, as in je sais. Of course, those change stems. Veut to voulons, peut to pouvait, say to savait, very different. So what we do to ensure that at the beginning stages of language acquisition, to give the students a solid language proficiency right off the bat, we limit the teaching of the verbs to that regularized stem. So we can teach veut, the ones I just showed you, veut, doit, peut, say, well, other verbs as well, of course, écoute and regarde and écrit, that don't change quite as much. So we make sure that we teach that. So we can use that with je peux, tu peux, il peut, elle peut, on peut, tout le monde peut, and la classe peut. So instead of using nous and vous right off the bat, we limit it to those forms so that the students at the beginning really speak correctly using those forms and speak proficiently using those forms. Of course, once they have developed a certain level of proficiency, we introduce nous and vous, and they slip in really easily to the students' knowledge and ability to use the language correctly. But that is a huge component of the reason why students develop that ability to use verbs effectively and correctly in the very first few days of their acquisition of the language. So we have the component of frequency, we have the component of reliability, which comes into the use of the pared down, the verbs. And then finally we have scope. So words with the broadest scope of applicability. Also cognates are part of the pared down language where possible. So instead of teaching rivière, lac, fleuve, océan, mer, étang, we just teach eau because the students can refer to all of those things using that one word. So we want to make sure with the limited time we have, we're focusing on a certain core vocabulary. Of course, context-specific words come into play, especially when we're talking about the plays and the songs and the stories. But we do have a certain core high-frequency vocabulary that we center everything around. So we have our gestures, we have what words we're going to teach, and those words come into the gesture approach, are gestured, I should say, through the gesture approach. Now, how do we contextualize the vocabulary so we make sure the students are engaged, they feel confident, they develop those important literacy skills, because we want students to be writing effectively and engaged in learning about writing, about effective creative writing, about peer editing skills, and even book publishing. So they develop a variety of skills, including dramatic arts skills and creative drama. So those are developed over the course of time as students become familiar with the methodology. At the very beginning, we simply work on having students learn what it is to act a play, coming to know the characters very, very well. The stories are very repetitive and easy to learn. Get into that detail a little bit better, but it's an absolutely fantastic way to engage students. And because the music is linked to the stories, and the students not only act out the characters and the settings and the plots, but they're dancing and they're moving as they sing to retell the story as well. There's that full engagement and repetition that we need, that really is part of that integrated component of this methodology. Now, the beauty of having one story, and we do take one story that we work on over the course of a 50-hour kit, is that as students start to learn a new language, what happens is they come to know this story very, very well. So let's get back to as if I was learning Mandarin, and a Mandarin teacher I was just starting to learn Mandarin. I don't know very much. And the Mandarin teacher said to me, what do you like to do on the weekend? Well, I might understand the question, but to come up with the answer in complete thought sentences with, the vocabulary I need might be a little challenging. When we are working with a story and we ask a question like, for example, qu'est-ce que le premier petit cochon aime faire dans la maison? The students can very quickly and very easily respond to that question because they know the story so well, answering such as, le premier petit cochon aime jouer la guitare dans la maison de paille. Taking that, and as we work on this one story, we do something that we call riffing. So we get the students to be very confident responding to questions around the story, and then we move out from the story to ask questions that are personal to the students. Est-ce que tu aimes? Qui aime jouer de la guitare? Est-ce que tu joues de la guitare classique ou électrique? Combien de fois par semaine est-ce que tu apprends la guitare? And so on, depending on where they are with the language. So we take the story as a starting point to help students with confidence develop proficiency at a basic level, and then we move out to help them, of course, talk about their own lives and their own interests out from that. And so our main goal is the transfer to spontaneous communication, oral and written, to develop those strong oral language skills, to develop those strong literacy skills in the language as well. And we want to be sure that this doesn't happen 2, 3, 4 years down the road. We want to make sure this happens from the very first day of the implementation of AIM. So I'm going to show you a video now where a teacher is using AIM in the classroom. And please don't hesitate to ask me any questions at any time. I want to make sure your questions are answered. I'm going to show you a video where a teacher is not using AIM, but is using some very good things as a core French teacher in the classroom. So let's have a look at this non-AIM teacher.
Aujourd'hui, je suis très excitée parce que la semaine prochaine, je vais visiter mon ami qui habite à Winnipeg. C'est vrai, je suis née à Winnipeg et toute ma famille habite à Winnipeg. J'ai 2 sœurs et j'ai ma maman et mon papa qui habitent là. Alors ma maman est tellement contente.
Okay, so that was a teacher who was, of course, not using AIM. We see that she is speaking in French only, which is fantastic. We see that the students are listening. We don't know whether they're understanding, but they're listening. And it's lovely because she's sharing something about herself, which I always encourage teachers to do, to connect with the students. A lot of teachers say to me, oh, if I speak only in French, I'll never connect with my students. As a matter of fact, I tell them, when you can speak only in French to your students and they understand you and they can speak to you in French, you are making the most unique connection that they possibly have if French is their only other language. You are the only adult with whom they speak in this other language. It's a very special connection. So this is the teacher, same teacher, who is actually a named teacher using AIM.
Pardon? Winnipeg. Excellent. Alors, je vais continuer maintenant. Est-ce que tout le monde sait ou ne sait pas que je suis née à Winnipeg? Je sais. C'est vrai. Je suis née là-bas. Et j'ai aussi des amis que je peux visiter là-bas aussi. Et j'aime aller à Winnipeg en avion.
Okay, so a few things I'd like to mention there. When a teacher is using the gestures to communicate with the students, the teacher is not using a script, but rather just she's talking about something that's personal and she wants to share with her students. If the students as a whole class, of course, it's almost like conducting a choir. The students are talking as the teacher is gesturing. They're predicting what she's going to say. And sometimes they can't predict. For example, if the teacher does je and aime, they can't predict that it's going to be not maybe, for example, je regarde or je lis or whatever it might be. So they may say je aime. So of course, this is a lovely opportunity in process to repeat without singling anyone out and do j'aime, j'aime, j'aime. And you can even ask the question, est-ce qu'on dit je aime ou j'aime? And we have a lot of raps and things that help students come to understand the liaison or the what we call that one, deux voyelles ensemble, ce kind. We have other raps for the infinitive form. And as you can see, this teacher, of course, is implementing or using the infinitive form as she is interacting, just as anyone would naturally. So, je veux aller, ou je dois voir, ou je peux lire. They all have the R in all of the infinitive forms have an R. At some point, I-E-R, I-R, O-I-R, I-R, and so on. So they all have the R in there, and we add that additional gender, that additional infinitive gesture to ensure that the students tag that on to the regularized stem, which is, for example, regarde, tu regarder, vois, tu voir, lis, tu lire, and so on. So the students are visualizing grammar. They are also visualizing other aspects of grammar apart from the infinitive form, many aspects of grammar, as a matter of fact. Gender, for example. So, il est grand, mais elle est grande. So, il and elle are these gestures. And when we have the feminine adjective, we add the gender gesture to add the additional sound whenever it happens. So, petit, petite. Content, contente. So the students are visualizing again aspects of grammar as they are saying it. This deeply embeds an understanding. And I just want to pause for a moment to talk about what is actually happening in the brain as the students are acquiring language and aspects of grammar through the gestures and auditorily and also kinesthetically. So we have this three sort of sided entry point. This, how would I say it? Anyway, there's three different ways that students are embedding this information in their brain. So they're embedding it auditorially when the teacher says it and when they say it. They're embedding it visually as the teacher's gesturing. They're visualizing the meaning, they're visualizing syntax, they're visualizing grammar. And they're kinesthetically embedding this information when they also are gesturing, which is not always, but we do ask the students to gesture once in a while. So what is happening is that information, that same information is being stored in different parts of the brain. And researchers have stated that this then allows for a more deep, it embeds the information more deeply in the brain and in different parts, as it is stored in different parts of the brain. It allows for easier recall when students need to remember those words. So let's just move forward here a little bit to the pared down language. I did mention, I believe, most of what we need to know on a basic level with respect to the pared down language, that it's based on scope and reliability and frequency. It is one of the key components of this methodology that really ensure success. As I mentioned earlier, less is more in language teaching, in my opinion. One of the things that I found as a teacher early on is I was giving the students too much variety of too much language variety, too many different words, and not enough repetition of those same words. Some words require a lot of repetition and other words a little less, but all words require a certain number of repetitions, and they need to see those words in order to develop word concept. They need to see those words in different contexts. And that's what we're constantly trying to do in AIM, where we place those same words from the pared down language in any given what we call kit, in the stories, in the songs, in the questions that we work on, in the raps that we do, and in our spontaneous gesturing for the class. So back to the stories. I love this quote from David Booth, who is one of my mentors and actually one of my professors at the University of Toronto, also an expert in language and literacy development in the English first language context. But I believe that what he says here applies even more so to a new language. So children new to a language find in a story context for understanding. It is not word lists that command their attention, but the lives of characters that fill the tales they read or listen to in the literary stories they meet. And how painful it must be for those children alien to a language to sit day after day without feeling connected to what is happening in the classroom. And yet through storying, how quickly they enter the activity, making sense of what is happening, building their own versions, listening, telling, retelling, talking about, reflecting upon, responding. And so we really do see this happening in a second language context where the children become the characters. They act out the roles of the characters, they dance dances based on those characters, and most particularly, they respond to questions based on the story, developing their ability to ask and respond to questions. And finally, they retell the story in their own words, and after that, extend the story using their own creativity to develop future stories for the book publishing process that we have. So it really engages students on all levels and all levels of interests and abilities. Some kids have that love of music and dance. Some kids have love of acting. Some kids have love of writing or reading. And so we try to make sure that all students' needs are met in terms of the way they learn. Okay, I will just move on, I think, here to show you a French play. I've mentioned the stories that we work on. I'll just show you a small excerpt of one of our French stories.
Le guépard arrive à la maison du lion. Il parle avec lui.
Monsieur Lion, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Il ne pleut pas depuis longtemps. Tout le monde a très soif. C'est un gros problème. Est-ce que tu peux nous aider?
D'accord, Guépard. Tu dois aller à l'arbre Ungali, un arbre magique qui est loin d'ici dans la forêt. Tu dois dire le nom de l'arbre et après ça, l'arbre peut aider les animaux. Dis à l'arbre que tout le monde a soif parce qu'il n'y a pas d'eau. N'oublie pas, c'est l'arbre Ungali.
Oh, merci, Monsieur Lion. Merci. Je cours à l'arbre maintenant. Au revoir.
Okay, so that was just a really short excerpt of this French play, which is based on an African folktale. We try to incorporate culture as much as possible through our kits as well, where appropriate. So all of the step 1 and step 2 plays, the simple entry-level plays, are very repetitive. They're not tiny scripts, though. They're full-length plays that take approximately 10 minutes or so for the students to eventually perform. And these plays are designed so that the students can, at the early stages of language acquisition, can rapidly learn the different roles of the characters. So what happens is there's sort of a structure that occurs. We have the narrator, we have one main character that says something similar to each of the other 3 or 4 characters, and the other 3 or 4 characters say pretty much the same thing until at the end of the story something is resolved or there is some kind of ending. Actually, it's often an unresolved ending, but certainly it ties things together at the end. So this allows students to, even on the first presentation of the story, begin to join in, begin to feel engaged. And then later on, of course, they practice their story. And a lot of the activities that we work on in the kit are based around the story, which allows us to ensure this, what we call pleasant repetition of vocabulary that is absolutely essential for rapid language acquisition. So here are some of the ways that we repair down language. One of them is our entry rap. We have entry wraps for primary students. We have them for elementary students, and this one is for junior high or high school students. And in our entry wraps, we set the stage for the setup of the daily lesson where students commit to using the target language only. We want to sort of bookend every single class with, at the beginning, I commit to target language only, and at the end, I acknowledge I did use the target language only. So we have a variety of systems in AIM, which I don't have time to talk about today, but a variety of systems that help the teacher and the students to develop a certain level of accountability for the target language only, because AIM is truly an immersion approach. We want only French to be used in the classroom. So here is just part of our entry wrap.
La classe commence et tout le monde est prêt. On doit parler seulement en français. Mais si quelqu'un parle en anglais, cette personne n'a pas de carte et ça c'est vrai. Ça c'est dommage, mais on espère aussi que tout le monde décide d'aider ses amis. En français, on parle tellement bien. Notre rap est terminé, oui c'est la fin.
So wraps like this, and in fact, everything we do in AIM is really a model for the future possibility that students create their own. AIM is a very model-based approach, and this is one of the reasons why the students are so successful. We make sure that students get enough practice through the modeling to be then very confident and very successful when they do some type of creative activity on their own. So eventually they will write their own entry wrap. So that's just one of the dances that we have that accompany one of the plays that are in the series of that we have. Again, just another way that students respond to the language in that way is by learning a choreographed dance, and then they can show it at an assembly or to other classes, or just videotape it for their own enjoyment. It's completely up to the teacher. So what are educators saying? Well, there are a variety of different educators that have used AIM. Gary Karkin from Southern New Hampshire University used AIM actually to teach ESL to new immigrants, some adults. And here we have a few other individuals, teachers, consultants, and Jim Cummins from OISE.
If I had to choose, one thing that distinguishes AIM classrooms from more typical core French classrooms, it's the level of emotional investment that kids have in the process and the fun that they're having. And again, that's fuel that drives the learning process.
So they're very keen and they can apply. I guess the most remarkable point is that they can apply everything or a lot of what they've learned in a context, in everyday life context.
And what we didn't anticipate would happen was that students in grade 4 with a sibling that it was in grade 7 were going home at night and actually speaking French in sentences at the dinner table. And the feedback was very impressive from the parents that all of a sudden their kids were having conversations that they couldn't follow in French at the dinner table.
So yeah, it's lovely, and I've heard this from many of my students and heard from teachers as well. It's really lovely the way students tend to make the language part of who they are, and they like to take it out into the hallway, out to recess, and actually out home where they talk to each other in French so their parents can understand. It is really lovely to see that happen. So sometimes teachers will say, well, you work on a story about the 3 little pigs, but are the students only able to talk about pigs? Is that what happens in an AIM classroom? Well, of course not. we use the story as a touch point or anchor, or sort of it grounds and allows us to repeat the vocabulary that we want them to learn and use it as a starting point to develop questioning skills and responding in complete thought, so the students do develop authentic proficiency. So we went into an AIM classroom and just said, can you guys just talk? Just, we're going to film you. So.
Et très fantastique.
Oui, oui, oui. Tu es toute seule maintenant. Et tout le monde avec Melissa. Oui, j'ai oublié son nom.
J'aime qu'il y ait peu de méchants.
Est-ce que tu peux chanter ça maintenant?
Très bien.
Oh, oui? Est-ce que tu peux chanter maintenant? Non, parce que tu es très... oh, oui.
Il y a 5 personnes dans ma famille, mais je pense que mon frère est un animal. Oui?
Well, as long as they're speaking in French, they're, I guess it's okay. They're complaining about their siblings. So these students had been through they were in their 3rd kit with AIM, so about 100, just a little over 100 hours of instruction. And you can see that in that first part of the clip where the young guy was trying to get the girl across to sing for the camera, which he really didn't want to do. And he was saying, oh, c'est parce que tu es très, and then he wanted to say embarrassed. Now, embarrassed isn't one of the most high frequency words that we have in the first couple of step kits. And so it was lovely, though, to see, and he knew that he could not use English. That is one really important rule that we have in an AIM classroom. We do not want to revert to English. We want students to use circumlocution wherever possible, and we train. We have certain strategies, certain activities that we use to develop an ability for circumlocution, to ensure that they're using the words that they have to say what they need to say, rather than reverting to English. So what we saw, which was really lovely, it sort of shows the cooperative learning aspect of AIM, is the girl beside him said peur, because that was a word, an alternate word that he could use in that context. So, all right, let's see. So I've shown you a lot about the development of oral language skills, which of course is something that AIM does well, but we also work a great deal on the development of written language skills. But in my experience, if we can develop very strong oral language skills, the written language skills will follow very easily, because we are working from, in most cases, from English to French, and we are sharing the same alphabet sounds for the most part. And so it is very, very easy to move quickly into this literacy approach that we have. So let's have a look at students working together and writing stories.
Oui. Il n'y a pas de mettre en salle et déchirer.
Est-ce que ça, c'est la même histoire, mais dans les mots différents? Oh oui. Dans les mots différents?
Qu'est-ce qu'on peut
Mais
faire?
est-ce que tu fais en partenaire ou
Saute.
beaucoup? Est-ce que tu fais
Et très pauvre.
Est-ce que tu fais ça?
Est-ce que c'est son? Non, ça c'est juste une
maison.
Et
tu fais ça?
Lui commence à marcher dans la forêt. Il espère trouver une amie dans la forêt. Elle a demandé
En train de... Oh, excellent. En train de... En 3 mots. En train de...
Après, il a triché avec un accent aigu. La petite chaperon rouge est partie le plus vite possible chez la grand-mère de chaperon rouge. Oui, est-ce que tu es a dit.
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'elle a dit?
Elle a dit. La grand-mère, d'accord.
Elle est malade, la grand-mère? Non, pas la grand-mère. Non, ta grand-mère.
Non, la grand-mère.
Non, ta grand-mère. Parce que c'est la grand-mère de chaperon rouge et la mère part à chaperon rouge. Alors c'est ta grand-mère. Ta grand-mère est malade.
So I noticed a question here. I think that is Paul, yeah. So the frequency of instruction, well, most of these students, well, none of the students are in immersion in any of the videos I've shown. They're all FSL, core French. So most of them have 30 minutes a day. A lot of these students were filmed out in British Columbia schools. So the most we get here is really 30 minutes a day. So yeah, and probably in terms of how many years they would have had with AIM, between probably 2 to 4 years with AIM. So we do a lot of creative work with the language and help students be creative with the language. So as I mentioned earlier, we often have the students write their own raps, and here is one. It's an inner city school in Ottawa. Again, this is a very transient school. A lot of students sort of in and out, and this is their second year with AIM.
Aujourd'hui, la classe commence et tout le monde pense et danse. Quand j'entre dans la classe française, je ne parle pas en anglais. On parle en français, c'est fantastique. La Bengali a bien appris. Je parle en français, c'est très très bien. Je fais les actions avec mes mains. En agresseur, ça c'est vrai. Mot. Word.
What I love about this is these are grade 8 boys who typically don't really like French necessarily that much, unfortunately, but they're really engaged. They're really proud of what they've done. Yes, the rap is really simple, but they've used the words that they know to create this rhyme. They even bring in the La Bengali just to make some rhyme happen with their rap. I've seen better ones, but this one is just exemplary, I think, of young student, well, not that young, I think they're in grade 8, and they started AIM in, yes, their second year with AIM, so they would have started in grade 7. So you just see, what I love about this is the level of engagement and pride in what the students have accomplished there. So now we're going to get quickly into the writing. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to show you what we can accomplish with AIM. That this is my favorite part, actually, although I love it, the kids are talking all the time. When students are writing, as I showed in that previous video, the students continue to talk. We never have students silently writing in an AIM classroom. They're always working cooperatively, developing their oral language skills in tandem with their written. So as they're learning to write and developing their literacy skills, they are developing their oral skills because they are talking to each other. They're supporting each other. They're giving each other ideas. So no one is sitting at their desk wondering, or at the table wondering what to do, or trying to get ideas. So I want to make sure that this is happening in AIM classrooms. And it's really something that, the kids enjoy, of course, because they laugh about their ideas and have a lot of fun sharing them. So this is one of my students when the step 1 kit Le Chat et la Lune was a little bit simpler. I used it for grade 1. Now I've developed a kit that's more appropriate really for grade 3. But back when it was a simpler story, my grade 1 student did this story retelling, and this was her first year of French, 30 minutes a day. By the end of grade 1, she wrote this story. Of course, any grade 1 student who cannot write in English is not going to be writing in French. But if they're developing beginning writing skills in English, I would expect that they would write a story in French. So what a story retelling is, it basically teaches students the concept of circumlocution, making sure that they are giving them the opportunity to practice saying things in different words. So what they have to do is, they know the story very well. We've been working on this story for about 35 hours when we begin this. So, we've been working on it since September, beginning of November, we start our story retelling. And so they know the story well. It's repetitive. So they've learned it, they've incorporated, and, they've learned the vocabulary very well, and the storyline and characters and everything. So now they have to retell the story. And what they must do is retell it absolutely in their own words, without repeating any sentence directly as it is said or stated or written in the original story. So they have to be all their own original sentences. And I do teach them, and this is part of the literacy component, to make sure that they are not only just repeating what happened, but they can embellish it as well. Things that weren't in the original story, colors of things, sizes of things, locations of things, what the characters were thinking that wasn't mentioned. So these are things that the students will add in their story retelling. And so this grade 1 student wrote about 3 and a bit pages for her story retelling. The same thing happens no matter what the language, no matter what the grade. It's the same process. But of course, in grade 11, we're going to see a story retelling that's much, much longer and much more accurate and much more detailed, but still the same process. Even in Japanese, we're having kids write with a completely different script, which is really quite amazing to me. And of course, not quite as long as we see in French because we share the same alphabet. Now down to grade 7. So this is a grade 7 student, first year of AIM, 30 minutes a day on average, wrote a story retelling of this kit here. And again, not repeating the sentences from the story as they appeared in the story, that every sentence has to be changed to some degree. So now we're going to move to the next step. We do story retelling only in the first step kit, in the first 50 hours. In the second step kit, then from 50 to 100 hours, we do a retelling and we also do a story extension. And has a whole different purpose. That allows students a great level of creativity, but yet still scaffolded. You've probably noticed that what we do with AIM is very, very scaffolded. I haven't shown you the other activities that precede the story retelling, but in our trainings, we do go through these. We have a variety of different scaffolded activities that allow students that gradual release of responsibility to eventually be able to write their own stories. So this story is an extension. So most of the stories that we work on in AIM are unresolved or end at an unresolved point. So for example, in Les Trois Petits Cochons, le loup sort de la maison, he goes out of the house, and then what? He's still hungry. Les cochons sont contents, but the loup is not very happy. He wants to go still and eat. So this is a story my 2 grade 1 students wrote as an extension. Now we'll discuss that. Just notice what you're seeing here, and maybe you can let me know what you think of their writing. Après que le loup sort de Les Trois Petits Cochons, il va à la maison et dort et se réveille et marche à l'oblaz et court et marche. Monsieur Loup est très fou et content. Et le loup frappe à la porte de la fille amie. Il dit à son ami, est-ce que tu veux danser avec moi? Oui, je veux, je aime toi. L'ami dit, est-ce que tu veux aller à ma maison? Le loup dit, oui, oui, je veux. Le cochon est ici, dit le loup. J'ai peur, dit la fille amie. Court à sa maison. Oui, je veux aller à ma maison. Est-ce que tu veux aller à ma maison? Oui, je veux aller à ta maison, dit le loup. Je veux faire une fête, dit la fille amie. Le loup dit, oui, 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 je veux. Est-ce que tu veux manger avec moi, dit le loup. Oui, 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 dit la fille amie. Je veux, je veux, je veux. And anyway, it goes on a little bit, and I love the writing, the spelling of ça c'est délicieux. So any thoughts on what you're seeing there in terms of what these grade 1 students have accomplished here, or what their skills might be? You could turn on your microphone if you like. Well, it's very much inventive spelling. The students are not copying words from some other story that's been pre-written for them. They're creating this story. So it shows us, what it shows us is that the students are able to say those words. They could tell the story orally, and they are telling the story orally. So we're going from oral to written. You can see the oral language coming through in this writing. The students aren't paying much attention. Oh, I'm so sorry that you can't turn on your microphone or camera. Oh, that's just, oh, I wonder if you're, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure, because I don't really, let me just see if I can help you with that. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. That might help with the, There we go. Might help. Oh,
there we go.
Hi, Amy.
I thought, oh, I'll turn my camera on. She won't feel like she's just talking to
Oh,
me
it's
on a person.
great.
Yeah, it's super impressive. It's very, very impressive. The work, like just the amount of writing. Like I'm just impressed by the amount of writing that they've produced. Their attempt to actually like extend the story, and often I've always found with my own students that it takes like a lot of encouragement to get them to put anything down on paper, especially when they're just starting, right? Because it's such a challenging task. So it's certainly impressive. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. One of the reasons why we get such long stories from the children, and I have to say, this story is not written over, 1 or 2 days, or 20 minutes. It's written over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks. So the students, while they're writing their stories, I'm also working with the whole class, modeling our whole class stories. So they're gaining ideas, they're sharing ideas with the whole class. They are not allowed to copy. I mean, I put away the whole class story, but they will draw on ideas sometimes that we've discussed in class to write their own story. But I give them a lot of time. So over that course of time, they develop their own ideas, they get excited about their stories. And so because they're writing together, they support each other and laugh and giggle and just come up with these funny ideas as they write. So they're really only writing 2 or 3 sentences or maybe 4 per day. And, over the course of several weeks are writing their stories, about 10 minutes every day. So I do find that it's a good process because they know the previous stories so well, and they're excited about those characters, and they've acted out those characters, and they've talked about those characters, and they've retold their written story about the characters. So now they're very excited to talk about. And so that's where those ideas come from, and that excitement to write happens. And so thank you for that question.
Can I just ask a quick question, only because and I apologize, but it's 9 o'clock here in Fredericton.
Oh, that's so late.
It's okay. It's okay. I understand with the time difference, but I have my own children that I've got to get to bed here shortly. So I did have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. One is it was a question pertaining to the teacher training.
Yes.
So just in watching the videos and even the actions, that's also super impressive. I'm assuming that there's quite a bit of teacher training that goes into this.
We do offer teacher training. So I'm going to skip ahead because I know it's coming to the end of it anyway. So how to implement, well, I'm just going to skip very quickly through this. Part of the training is embedded in the kits themselves. And some teachers just learn how to implement AIM through the kit. It's not recommended. We have a large AIM teacher community all over the world where teachers come together on our forum and also in the training sessions to learn about AIM, to support each other, to come back and learn more. So we have a teacher's guide, we have lesson templates. It's thoroughly and completely described for the teachers to guide them through the implementation of the methodology, through the partner group activities, through the big book, the image cards, the posters, the assessment activities, everything they need to implement AIM, in addition to the digital portal that we also offer where they can share that for at home for the students to review if they like or not. But it can be used in class to show the videos, to learn the gestures, to show the e-reader of the story, to show the play acted, to show all and practice all the songs and raps and dances with the students in class, and the kids can watch it at home. So in terms of the training, we offer a couple of major trainings a year, and those are our winter institutes and our summer institutes. And we have a 5-step training. Now, not all teachers go through all 5 steps, but we offer it in case, they would like to come back to training. So every level is comprised of a couple of days, with the exception of level 5. So level 1 is a 2-day training, January 21 and 28. And then level 2 training is January 22nd and 29. At our summer institute that's live, we'll offer levels 1 and 2 and 3, and we'll offer levels 1 and 2 for both core French and for immersion, because we have a lot of teachers now using AIM in immersion, depending on the grades. Later immersion come to my FSL, but very early primary kindergarten grade 1, we have a specific immersion resource for those teachers. So yes, we do have leveled trainings for teachers. And we have our forum, again, as I mentioned, where they join and they can just discuss anything AIM, and I'm on it, and other facilitators, and we're there to support any questions they might have at any time.
What are your levels? What do they correlate to? Is it age or just no?
Yeah, it doesn't correlate to age, because AIM is the same really, whether you're using the methodology with, little kids or, 5 to 105, it's the same methodology. It's just the stories will be age appropriate. The pacing is what is fairly different. And some of the activities are very different. We're not going to give, expect students to do long stories in kindergarten, but even in grade 1, we do expect them to do some stories if they are writing in English. Otherwise, if not, we maintain a sort of a maternelle approach with grade 1s who don't write. But we really raise the bar for kids in AIM. We want them speaking only in French, and we want them to be writing a lot. And so in our training sessions, it's open to teachers of all grade levels. I typically use sort of a mid-level kit when I'm training teachers, so that it can apply to a broad range of teachers, because really whatever kit they choose, they're going to be using those same strategies and techniques that I'm using with whatever kit I'm demonstrating with any kit that they use. So yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for coming. It's such a late evening.
Well, that's okay with the time change. There's not much you can do about that, but I definitely wanted to hear a little bit more of what you had to say. So I appreciate you taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, I'll sign off now. So bye, and I see my colleague there. So bye, Paul. Okay, take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, so I sort of went quickly through some of the previous aspects of AIM. If I'm happy to go a little more slowly if you like. We have certainly come to the end of the session. So if there's anything that you would like to ask or have me show again, I'm happy to do so. Certainly if you have any questions that come up after this session, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm just writing my email here. I'm happy to answer any questions. There we go. So I know it's very late for some of you, so I thank you so much for joining me tonight. And as I say, I welcome any questions you might have, and hope to see you perhaps at one of our AIM sessions in the future. So thanks everyone, and have a nice evening.